I would say just a small tip to improve your chances of getting noticed by recruiters would be when you put the company you've worked for in your CV one by one, it's really helpful if you put what industry that was as well. So for example, you might say X company, B2B SaaS, X company, e-commerce.
I would say events and networking is an obvious one, but also being a bit targeted with the roles that you're applying for. Don't just apply for any old role because you're really desperate to get a job, because your impact when it does come time for a job that really suits you is going to be less so when that recruiter sees your CV or portfolio. So do try to be targeted with your approaches and get to events, networking events, and speak to us. And hopefully we'll be on our radar for when the time is right.
Optimizing your profile on LinkedIn to include keywords about jobs that you want or your experience is definitely a way to get noticed by recruiters.
A good way to get noticed by recruiters is to kind of just network, go to events. The more you go out and meet people, the more us as recruiters will get to know you on a more personal level, and if roles come up, then we'll be able to kind of think of you and be able to put you forward for the right role.
The best way to get noticed by recruiters is to just show your content on LinkedIn. So it'd be best to show what you're working on, what you've been learning. Also, it'd be good to also have a link for your portfolio as well. And I think one of the best things to do is not just follow any recruiter. It'd be best to follow recruiters who are looking specifically in your market. So that way you can also introduce yourself, and they may not have a role for you now, but at least you've introduced yourself and you got yourself on their radar. So in the future, a role may come.
Make sure that you UX your CV, so make sure you include a link to your portfolio at the top and ensure that your work experience is easy to find for the hiring manager.
An interview tip I would give to candidates would just be simply to smile. There are lots of studies that prove when you smile, it physically has an effect on your self-confidence. So as nervous as you might be, just remember to smile.
Really make sure you take the time to research the client, so if they've got a website or an app, make sure you check them out and familiarise yourself, and you can bring that up in interview to show that you've really taken the time to look into the brand.
I recommend not going there blindly, so that way you also have a good idea if the company is a good fit for yourself before you go in.
So research the interviewer. It will help you understand a little bit more about their background, and from there you can obviously ask them questions and build some rapport with them, which is obviously really useful.
Something I tell a lot of my candidates is have a look at the company blogs or their news feeds for the most up-to-date information about that company, and where possible try and feed that into the conversation or drop that into the conversation so the client or the interviewers can see that you've done your research, and it could make for quite an interesting topic to talk about as well. I myself have enjoyed that when I've done interviews and the person's talked to me about something that's going on the Zebra People company website or our blog or even our Instagram feed, and it just goes to show that they have taken the time to do their homework as well.
A green flag candidates can look out for in interviews would be that you meet your line manager, and that person is someone you can communicate with well and someone that you feel will really advocate for your team and your discipline.
There's many a green flag, often it's just the vibe, but I would say obviously diversity is always a positive green flag, but if they are making an effort to foster more diversity and say the panel, just because their company is full of white men, is only white men, but they're making an effort to kind of change that, then that's good as well.
They make you feel at home, it doesn't feel too formal, and they allow you time at the end to ask everything you need to about the company and the role.
A green flag I would say candidates can look out for is if the interviewer is now speaking about later stages of the process, and also there's a much more human element to it. It's more of a conversation in that interview. It doesn't feel like you're just being asked questions and you just have to answer it back.
Having the opportunity to meet the team is definitely a green flag, as it shows openness within the company.
For me, I would say something that shows the client's taken the time to properly analyse your CV and or portfolio. For me, that would be a good sign, because some don't always take a proper amount of time to really figure out how your fit could work within the team. So for them, doing a bit of homework prior to your interview, for me, would be a green flag.
I would say a red flag to look out for in interviews is there not being a clear interview process. Candidates should be interviewed fairly, and it shouldn't be made up as they go along.
I would say if there's a lack of continuity between the questions that are being asked by the interviewer and what the job description was originally about.
So one red flag would be that the person interviewing you doesn't know that much about the discipline that you're interviewing for.
I believe a red flag that candidates can look out for is if the interview is quite robotic and there's not a human element to the interview, so there's no back and forth conversation that provides quite a good flow for the candidate and the interviewer.
If the role seems different from the initial brief, it could mean that the company are slightly unsure on the type of person that they're looking for.
If the panel seems disengaged or not interested, that can definitely be something to look out for.
I would say for clients, a tip would be that obviously the candidates you're interviewing have been screened and their general experience should fit if you have a good hiring manager. But in terms of looking at the nitty-gritty of their experience, don't look at how their experience doesn't perfectly match. Rather look at how their experience that is slightly different to what you thought you had in mind could benefit you and could sort of add like an interesting take on the problem you're trying to solve.
Have a consistent and structured interview process.
Remember, it's a two-way conversation, so try and make them feel as at home as possible and try and show genuine interest in them and their work.
The interview tip I'll give the clients is to make the conversation a lot more conversational, so that way it can make the candidate feel a lot more comfortable in answering questions, and that way you can both get a good idea if it could be a good fit.
My tip for clients is not to overtalk in the interview, allow the candidates to speak, and when they're explaining points, just let them kind of get through what they need to so they can obviously explain it in the right detail.
An interview tip I would give for clients would be to promote diversity within your panels. And for example, if you have a female candidate, you shouldn't then just be saying we need a female in the interview panel. It should be every interview has that female in the interview panel. You really want to be doing what you can to promote change in your culture and in the visibility across the company.
For me, is really valuing the candidate's time as well, trying not to make last-minute cancellations. Interviews do work both ways, and you really want to show that you value their time as well. And being slick and organised with your process, more so than your competition, if you really want the best candidates. I would say if you were to ask the interviewer what they most like about working at that company, and listen to their response, and see how genuine or scripted it is. Obviously, it's going to be interesting to hear what they say anyway. But again, just to see the way that they say it could make for a bit of an insight as to what it's actually like working there.
An interesting question I would find asking a client would be, what is your current biggest frustration and what are the steps you're taking to solve that, like pragmatically? And also, how do you see that being solved, or are there spaces where you feel that you're hitting a wall, and how are you sort of navigating that with your colleagues?
Top question to ask in an interview is, what does a typical day look like for this role?
I would definitely ask about how they invest in their employees, so things like career progression, training, flexibility, because you want to know that you're joining somewhere that really invests in their employees.
Asking if there's any missing experience within your CV gives you a chance to rectify any questions that the interviewer might have regarding your experience.
My top question to ask in an interview would be, is there anything you were hoping to see from me that I haven't demonstrated already? It's something I've used myself at the end of an interview, and you can be quite surprised how openly the interviewer can really tell you what they were looking for that you maybe haven't evidenced yet. And that's the perfect example for you to get rid of any concerns that they might have.